Good afternoon. We're going to get started now. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lori Riley. I'm Communications Director for Sustainable CUNY, who is the host of this webinar today on behalf of the Mayor's Office of Sustainability, the New York City EDC, and the City University of New York. We're going to give you just a brief background on the agenda here so you can understand what the New York City Solar Partnership has been charged with, what we have been tasked to do for New York City. Jeff Irvine is here with us today, New York City Solar Ombudsman, who is helping to manage the New York City Solar Partnership, is going to give you the basics of solar so that you can fully understand all of the benefits when we tell you about the Solarize New York City program, and then we will open it up to your questions and our answers. So please type your questions into the chat box, and we will get to them as many as time allows. So back in 2005, Sustainable CUNY charted the barriers and then worked with the Mayor's Office on a roadmap to unlocking the solar market. So the Solar Partnership was formed in 2006 and is led by Sustainable CUNY. And the reason why it is a university that is leading this charge is that we have been able to bridge the turnovers, the natural turnovers in administrations and personnel to bring projects to fruition. So we serve as that objective third party that has been able to gather all of the stakeholders around the table to help unlock this market, to chart the roadmap. We have deep resources that have enabled us to give you the market and data analysis, the policy makers. We have solar ombudsmen that are dedicated. This is their day job to help navigate through the solar market in New York City and to help installers and help you with the solar market. We also have deep IT resources across our 24 campuses, such as the Carsey Center at Hunter College, that help build the New York City and the New York State Solar Mapping Portal. The Mayor's Office and New York City EDC, the other important partners in this New York City Solar Partnership, bring an awful lot to the table. As you can imagine, there's a vast network of agencies. They have the mayor's ear. They can help influence policy. So that is their strategic focus. So we have been very proud of this partnership for a decade now. In 2014, Mayor de Blasio made a significant commitment to help bring solar to a whole new level in New York City. So the mayor set the goal, the largest solar goal in city history in 2014, and any city history in 2014, to help further reduce the market barriers for investing in solar power, to help attract and support solar energy companies. When we first took a look at the market in 2005, there was only about 5 solar installation companies. Now there are over 90 solar installation companies. In fact, in all of New York State, it turns out that New York State is 4th in the country for good solar jobs. And then the other important task is increasing solar energy capacity. And that's what brings us to today, to unlocking these programs, to rolling out these solar programs for you and for your communities. And again, it's the Solar Partnership of the City University of New York, the Mayor's Office, and New York City EDC that are tasked with this. I just want to show you one slide on our growth since one city and since our work has begun, and it has been exponential. So you see there, pre-2005, there was barely a blip, and then you see the uptick, especially since 2014, on solar installations in New York City. So that represents right now, New York City has 94 megawatts of installed capacity, and then the gray you see there are those that are already approved or in the process of being installed. Comes to 94 megawatts, and that represents about 8,469 installations. So you can see that New York City has quite an appetite for solar, and this is not even counting the dozens of megawatts of applications that have been submitted just recently through the Department of Buildings. I'd like to now turn it over to Jeff Irvine, New York City Solar Ombudsman, to give you some Solar 101. He helps manage the New York City Solar Partnership. Jeff?
Thank you, Lori. So welcome everyone to this webinar. And we're starting with Solar 101, just to give you a little bit of background on solar not just in the city, but how it works so you have the context to understand the Solarize NYC program that we'll be talking about in the second half of the webinar. And so to begin with, the first question that most consumers ask is how big of a solar system do they need? And when we talk about the size of solar, we typically talk in terms of the power capacity of the installation. So a typical residential home in New York City would install about a 5 kilowatt solar system, whereas a commercial business or commercial property, which typically has a larger energy demand and more space on their roof, typically installs a larger installation, anywhere from 50 to 500 kilowatts. And then when we get into larger installations, over a megawatt, that's industrial scale. We're talking about large warehouses and rooftops. And then going even further, utility scale installations are over 2 megawatts in capacity. And when we talk about the capacity of a solar panel, that's how much power it can produce when the sun is at its peak. It's the most power or flow of energy that it will produce at any one given time. Now, when we're talking about Solarize NYC, we're typically talking about smaller installations like the 5 to 7 kilowatt residential installations or the commercial size installations. Now, let's go through the basics of a solar panel. The panels, or the rectangular modules that you see up on roofs, are made up of individual solar cells. These are all wired together to produce electrical output, and a typical panel or module will produce anywhere from 250 watts to 330 watts of power at any one given time. These panels are wired together to make arrays, which gets to the scale of the 5 kilowatts or 50 kilowatts that I was talking about on the previous slide. Now, how it works is the sun will shine in the middle of the day. That sunlight is captured by the solar panels and creates DC power. An inverter is needed to convert that DC power into AC power that you can use to power your appliances, light bulbs, and anything else in a typical home or business. Any AC power that's generated from the panels is immediately available for use in the home or business. But if any excess is produced, it goes back out onto the electric grid, and the utility meter will measure this consumption through a process called net metering, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Now, any power that goes back out onto the grid, the homeowner or business will receive credit for it. So you get the full credit of all of the energy produced by the solar panels on a given roof. Now, I mentioned net metering. Net metering is what allows customers with solar to export back to the utility grid during times of excess generation beyond the energy needs of the building at the time. So this might be during the middle of the day when a homeowner is out at work, or it could be during times when a factory is not operating at full capacity. All of the excess power produced by the solar panels will be credited by the utility to that customer's utility account so that they receive the full value of the electricity as it's offsetting their normal energy production. And so you can think of this like rollover minutes on a cell phone plan. If you generate excess at one time, you can use the credits that you receive for consumption later, say at night when the sun isn't shining and your solar panels aren't producing energy. This also works over longer term, such as over months when typically in the summer we have our air conditioners running, we're using a lot of energy. The solar power up on the roof may not produce enough energy to offset all of that consumption. But during the fall, like we're getting towards now, when we open up our windows, we're using less energy. We might produce more solar energy than we use in a given month. Those credits can be transferred month to month to offset higher usage in other months. So the next question that a customer typically asks is, what makes a good site for solar? This is a particularly important question in New York City, where we have all different types of buildings. An installer will oftentimes look for a south-facing roof, which will maximize the energy production of the panels over the course of the year. Since we have so many flat roof buildings in New York City, the panels can be tilted, like you see in the photo on the slide here, to face south, southeast, or southwest. We also want to make sure that the panels are not shaded by trees or other obstructions or buildings, especially to the south. We also need a certain amount of area to fit the panels. Typically, it's about 100 square feet per kilowatt, so a residential installation would need about 500 square feet of available space. Also, we want to make sure that the roof is in good enough condition that it won't need to be replaced immediately upon the installation of the solar panels. So if a customer's roof is toward the end of its life, say 15 or 20 years old, the installer typically recommends that they replace their roof first so they won't have to take the panels off when they're replacing the roof. Lastly, adequate electrical service is important as well, and that encompasses a number of things, including the utility rate that the customer is on, and also the amount of energy they consume. A typical solar installer will try to size the solar system to meet the needs of the customer's energy consumption to try to zero out as much of their electric bill as possible. Now, after those questions, perhaps the number one question of customers is, how do I pay for solar? Now, there's a number of options here in terms of how to finance a solar energy system, and we typically break these down into two categories: third-party owned systems and direct ownership. With third-party ownership, the host site and the customer doesn't actually own the panels. Rather, they lease them or they purchase the energy from them using a power purchase agreement. This allows them to receive the benefits of the solar energy without any upfront cost, and it generally results in immediate savings. This is a lower risk strategy where the installer manages the repairs and the management of the installation over time, but it also results in a lower return on investment over the long term, such as 15 or 20 years. When we're talking about direct ownership, we're either talking about a direct cash purchase or we're talking about financing through a loan. Right now, there are many solar loans available that can oftentimes result in the same benefits of a lease, where you're not paying anything out of pocket or no upfront cost, but you end up owning the system at the end of the day. And this results in a higher return on investment over time. Typically, with a cash purchase in New York City, a customer can see a full payback of their investment in just 4 to 7 years. With the financing options available through NYSERDA and other private providers, that can be achieved with essentially no money down and often paid back through on-bill financing on a utility bill. Now, how are we able to receive such good payback times for solar energy? Well, first and foremost, the cost has been falling steadily for the last 15 years, and especially in the last 5 years. The cost of solar has fallen about 80% since 2009. In addition to that, there's never been a better time to go solar when combining the low cost of the equipment with all of the available benefits through tax credits and cash incentives. Now, I'm not going to go through each individual incentive on this slide, but you can see that there are incentives available at the federal level, the state level, and locally here in New York City. Combined, these can reduce the net cost of the installation by upwards of 80%. And now NYSERDA offers a program called Affordable Solar that targets low and moderate income individuals and provides an added incentive to make it easier for these customers to go solar. Now, this is the type of information that the Solar Ombudsman and Solarize NYC will train volunteers who are running Solarize NYC campaigns to understand that they can answer questions of local residents and businesses who are interested in going solar through the campaign. We provide train-the-trainer services that I'll talk about in a minute, as well as technical assistance. And before you know it, you'll be talking about the federal investment tax credit and the New York State solar tax credit like it's second nature. Now, in addition to those incentives, there are also financing options available that come with low interest and are subsidized, like I mentioned on the previous slide. So through the New York Sun program and Green Jobs, Green New York, there are smart energy loans available as well as on-bill recovery loans. The on-bill loans are especially attractive because they are paid back directly on the utility bill, making it simple. There's no secondary bill. There's also credit enhancement available to further assist low and moderate income customers for qualifying for these credit options. So now that we've gone through Solar 101, hopefully you understand a little bit about what we're going to be talking about in a Solarize NYC program. So let's move on to Solarize more broadly. What is a Solarize program? This is a model that originated in Oregon back in 2009 and has since been replicated across the country with great success. There have been over 50 successful Solarize programs in New York State and many more in Connecticut, Massachusetts, Virginia, and across the country. The hallmarks of a Solarize program are a group purchasing program that leverages the collective purchasing power of a community. These programs are run typically by a local community group, such as those on the call today. It could be a community board or other trusted local organizations. Additionally, costs are reduced through a competitive installer selection. So there's a vetting process where each group will be assisted by Solarize NYC to select an installer that offers a discount based on the collective purchasing power and the scale that they're able to generate through the group purchasing program of everyone going solar in the community together at the same time. Now, what does that look like exactly? Most often, Solarize programs use tiered pricing. So each installer who proposes to take part in the program proposes a series of tiers whereby the more people who join and the more contracts that are signed, the lower the price goes within each tier. And I'll have an example of this on one of the next slides. So there's an incentive available for all people in the community to join together to reduce the price together and save on solar energy. Lastly, the most important component of the plan and of the Solarize program is community-led outreach and education. And that's where the communities who we're talking to right now to apply to the Solarize NYC program really lead the way. Community groups that are trusted and have connections within the community can help educate their neighbors, the local businesses and residents and members in their organizations about solar and help connect them into the campaign to take advantage of this unique opportunity. The whole idea is to make solar simple and more affordable. But we realize that people's time is limited. So the last important piece of a Solarize program is that it only goes for a limited time. Generally, the full cycle of the campaign takes 6 to 9 months, with about 4 months dedicated strictly to community-led outreach and education. This encourages people to make a decision and go solar in a timely fashion, but often the benefits of Solarize programs persist much longer. Communities who have done Solarize programs have noticed that the lower pricing generally persists beyond the campaign as there's more competition in their marketplace. And as more neighbors hear about their neighbors going solar, they end up joining the campaign and go solar even after it ends. So Solarize NYC is meant to empower local community groups such as yourself to run these campaigns and to provide you the resources that you need to help solarize your community. The solar partnership led by CUNY with the Mayor's Office of Sustainability and NYC EDC did a comprehensive stakeholder input process to design this campaign. Perhaps the most important thing that we heard as we talked to other Solarize campaigns that had been run across the country, across the state, and local stakeholder groups was that no two neighborhoods or groups in New York City are the same. So we've tried to design Solarize NYC to be customizable and tailorable to meet the needs of any local community. It's not too prescriptive, but it provides all of the necessary resources and support to run a successful campaign. So what does that look like? The New York City Solar Partnership will provide financial resources from $5,000 to $8,000 to help pay for staff time, marketing materials, available space for meetings, and other campaign activities. Additionally, we have marketing material templates and designs, logos that can help create flyers and educational materials to get the word out in local communities that are selected to participate. I've already mentioned the Solar Ombudsman team. and they'll be available throughout the campaign to provide technical assistance, help answer questions, and deal with any challenges that come up along the way. Additionally, they'll provide volunteer training. We think about this as a train-the-trainer program where the Solar Ombudsman will help instruct volunteers and campaign leaders about how to talk about solar, how to answer questions, and how to lead workshops to the local community about solar so that a wider net can be cast in terms of getting the word out and helping the community go solar. Additionally, we realize that the capacity of different community groups is limited to certain degrees, so we also want to connect potential applicants to partners who will also provide assistance. There's many organizations throughout the city who have conducted successful Solarize campaigns in the past, and they can be leveraged through their skills and lessons learned to help run successful programs in the future. Solarize NYC will help make these connections for local organizations interested in running their own campaigns. Additionally, I want to mention that Sustainable CUNY has run a number of campaigns throughout New York City and New York State, totaling just about 1 megawatt of solar and capacity installed over the last year. Now lastly, educational materials and workshop templates will be provided to all of the campaigns. These include Solar 101 sheets, slide decks, and all of the information needed to run a successful campaign and provide homeowners and businesses the tools they need when deciding whether to go solar. The campaign overall will run up to 8 campaigns annually through 2025. So the application that is currently up on nysolarize.com is for the first round of Solarize NYC. We'll be doing subsequent rounds in 2017 and ongoing forward through 2025. You can apply until September 13th for the first round at nysolarize.com. So what does the Solarize NYC campaign actually look like? What are some of these materials? Well, the first 2 months, the community selection process is how it all begins. That's the section that we're in right now. You and other potential applicants will form teams of volunteers or coalitions of organizations. Set your goals, how much solar you want to install, perhaps how many people you want to try to educate. A pilot program that Sustainable CUNY and the Solar Partnership ran in Brooklyn Community Board 6 last year helped to reach 660 people and educate them about solar. Once you've formed your team, you can apply to Solarize NYC for the first round on the website nysolarize.com, and then the partnership will be reviewing applications. Once communities are selected and notified, we'll begin the process of installer selection. So this is where the local community can add their input into the type of things they want to see in a local installer. So this might include whether the panels are manufactured in the United States. It could include whether the installer offers workforce development opportunities, or perhaps just if they want to have certain financing options available. All of this can be included in the Solarize NYC installer application that the partnership will help selected communities go through to issue a request for proposals from installers who work in New York City. Once the installer is selected by the local communities running campaigns, that's when the real fun begins, the community outreach. As I mentioned, this part of the program typically lasts 16 weeks or 4 months. It includes marketing, workshops, and signing people up to have their roofs assessed for solar potential by the selected installer. To give some examples of previous Solarize campaigns, in the campaign that we ran in Brooklyn, we had marketing materials distributed by mail. We had some advertisements up on phone booths. We did 10 community workshops, as well as tours of local solar installations, and one-on-one sessions during block parties and other community events and fairs. It's really a team effort where local community groups can join together and help get the word out about the opportunity through Solarize NYC. Then, at the end of the campaign, it's time to make the final decision. This is as community members sign up, they will have their sites assessed by the selected installer, and they will start to receive proposals from the installer for the installation. It's important to note that although the community is joining together to leverage their collective purchasing power, that each individual homeowner or business will sign their own contract with the installer. Then, once they make that final decision, it's time to celebrate a successful campaign, and the installations will begin several months later once all the necessary permits are secured. So where do you start? It starts with your community, but how do you define a community? That's where you come in. As I mentioned during our stakeholder process, we heard that the most important factor for running successful Solarize campaigns in New York City is to provide the flexibility to handle the diversity and different types of organizations and neighborhoods throughout the city. So you can tell us what your community is. It might be geographically defined, such as a neighborhood, could be a community district, or a set of neighborhoods. It could even go as small as a series of blocks or associations at a more local level. Additionally, an affinity group or membership organization could also constitute a community. This might be a house of worship. It could be an employer. CUNY, for example, did a Solarize campaign to all CUNY employees last year with great success. Basically, if the members of the community identify with that community, that counts. So you can define your community however you choose, as long as there's a level of interest there for solar energy. So you tell us on the application how you define your community, and then we'll go from there. Now, the community selection process and application process. It starts with a letter of interest. This is currently available on nysolarize.com and is optional. The point of the letter of interest is to notify the New York City Solar Partnership of your interest in running a Solarize campaign and to receive future announcements of webinars such as this one. We have a letter template up there, but this is purely optional. If your organization or coalition of organizations wants to run a Solarize NYC campaign, you start by applying through the full form application. This is online, again, at nysolarize.com, and you have to complete an online form and application, fill out a certification and release form, and then also a spending plan template. The spending plan template is like a budget, and this allows us to grant you the $5,000 to $8,000 in financial resources that I mentioned at the top of the webinar. We realize that many organizations may not have done Solarize campaigns previously and be uncertain of how funding should be allocated towards a campaign. So that's why we've provided examples and templates from previous campaigns so that you can see how a typical campaign spends resources on advertising, marketing, and other outreach activities. The process of selection will be led by Sustainable CUNY on behalf of the partnership, and there are really four main criteria that we're looking at to evaluate community selection. The first is identity and interest. So I already talked about how a community can be defined in many different ways, so long as there's collective identity. We also want you to measure the level of interest. That could be done through a short informal survey, or also through collecting anecdotes from different community members and generally gauging the level of appetite for solar energy within the community. We also want to evaluate the organizational capacity of the organization leading the campaign or the coalition of organizations, and the feasibility of the campaign given the local neighborhood or area being targeted and the goals of the campaign. Lastly, it's a very important piece of the One City Built to Last plan that funded the Solarize NYC campaign, that solar expand in the city, not just in terms of absolute solar energy installed, but also expanding access to solar energy equitably across the city. So if your campaign or your community wants to target a population or a group of residents or individuals who have traditionally lacked access to solar, perhaps a low to moderate income community or others who have been precluded because of building constraints, if they have a building stock that is not typically adequate for solar, that's something else that we'll take into account for our selection. When you're putting together your application, we have a number of resources available to you, including public information sessions and webinars such as this one. There is an FAQ up on the nysolarize.com website, and we'll be adding questions to that as they go in. Now, additionally, we also have some other resources up there, including a fact sheet on Solarize and some templates. Please visit the website to check those out, and then we'll also have a Q&A at the end of this webinar. As I mentioned already, the deadline for applying is September 13th. You can see the website up there. nysolarize.com and solarizenyc.com go to the same place, so either URL you type in will take you there. Now, when we look at selecting the installers, here's an example of the tiered pricing that I was talking about earlier. This example is taken from the SunShares program, which was the program for CUNY employees that I mentioned. You can see that as more solar is contracted and installed through the program, starting with the 1 to 24 kilowatt tier, moving up to 25 kilowatts, the price goes steadily downward. So I mentioned that a typical residential installation is about 5 kilowatts. So in this example, after 5 installations or contracts signed, the tier would move to tier 2, and that decreases the price by about 5 cents per watt. So when you're thinking about the gross cost, you would multiply this per watt price by 1,000. And it's important to note that these prices are the gross cost of the installation. They don't take into account the many incentives that I mentioned earlier. Now, as more contracts are signed and more people participate, the price goes even lower. And you can see how this can compare to an average residential price in a given county, in this case, Brooklyn. We're able to see great savings over the average price in an area. Now, community outreach, I've talked about a bit already, but here are some examples of the materials that your campaign will have access to through the template of Solarize NYC. This is an example of the Solarize Brooklyn CB6, which was the pilot program that I mentioned earlier, run in Brooklyn Community District 6 last year. We set up a website, and we'll assist campaigns in doing the same so that you can sign up online and see how the different tiers are moving in real time. We'll set up posters for you. This is an example of a Solarize poster that was used in that same campaign. And then lastly, social media is a great tool for outreach as well. This is an example of the Solarize Brooklyn CB6 Facebook page, and we had great success in that campaign through Facebook, targeted outreach and advertising, as well as Twitter to access community groups with large memberships. Now, it's important to note that any individual in New York City, including those going through the campaign, or even any of you on the webinar today, can find out your solar potential on the New York Solar Map. This map was was created by Sustainable CUNY in partnership with many organizations, and it provides an ability to enter your address up here in the top left and find out how much solar will fit on a given roof. All you have to do is type in your address, select whether you're a residential customer or a commercial customer, and that will pull up the building and then provide an output with the estimated system size, payback time, and cost savings. So you can see you start here by entering your address. Then you receive comprehensive printout of all of the net cash flow savings. You can see this installation would save about $60,000 over 25 years. And this can be done for any address in the city. It's a great tool for local campaigns reaching out throughout the process. Lastly, there are additional resources on the New York Solar Map and Portal for financing and other how-to resources. These are all available at nysolarmap.com. Now, the last part of the campaign is to make final decisions. This is the process of after a homeowner or business has received a site assessment, they'll decide whether to sign a contract with their solar installer. This process can take several months as homeowners evaluate contracts. and typically a campaign will set a deadline by which all of the contracts must be signed in order to receive the group discounts. Now, Solarize NYC is directed at rooftop solar by group purchasing for local small installations on residential properties or for commercial properties. For much larger installations or installations where the local host site does not have much energy demand, community shared solar can be an option. Community shared solar allows people who may not have the rooftop to install a solar system, such as renters or residents of co-ops, to subscribe to a larger solar project located in the community. Now, this is a new option in New York. It's only been available for about half a year or a little bit longer, and there aren't currently any operational projects. But the New York City Solar Partnership is working to expand that market and grow that market in the city. And if you're interested in those options, we have a website for you as well at sharedsolarnyc.com. There's a portal there where you can, as a building owner, connect to interested developers and receive quotes for what the financial benefits you would receive for hosting a community shared solar project. So to review, you can find out more about the Solarize NYC program as well as the shared solar program at solarizenyc.com. You can go there to fill out the application. We're looking for first round applications by September 13th. And if you have any questions, you can email them to us at nysolar@cuny.edu. And additionally, this webinar is being recorded, so it will also be posted up on that website. And now that we have wrapped up, we're going to take some questions, and there's a chat feature on the WebEx that we encourage you to type your questions into, and we'll be taking them one at a time.
When you put your question in, you can just send it to everyone. There's a selection there.
Yeah, and so I've received a few private questions. The first one is going over community solar and how a building owner can leverage their extra roof space beyond their on-site energy demand. And so this is what I was talking about with Shared Solar NYC. Community shared solar basically allows a host site to host a larger installation that can then provide energy on-site, but then any excess can be subscribed to by local people within the community. And this is a great way to install a larger system than you might be able to install if your large rooftop did not have very much on-site energy demand. And as I mentioned, this is a relatively new policy in New York State. It was just enacted by the PSC last summer and has been just getting going. So it's an exciting time, and the Solar Partnership has set up that portal and will be undertaking other activities in order to gain access to that market. But I just want to emphasize that Solarize NYC as a group purchasing program is mainly directed towards rooftop solar for local residents and businesses.
We will be giving a shared solar webinar shortly. For the purpose of the rest of the question and answers here, we will stick with Solarize and group purchasing questions.
And so the next question we received is, what is a full geographical area? And so the question about geographical area for a campaign can be flexible. As I mentioned earlier, we allow the community to define what their geographical boundaries are. So this could be an official geographic boundary, such as a community district, or it could be something a little bit more nebulous, such as the boundaries of a local neighborhood. And it's up to community organizers and applicants to decide how they want to define their community. Based on the stakeholder input that we received in the previous campaigns that we've run, we found that it's really important for communities for community members to self-identify with their community. So typically in a geographic campaign, you would want to choose a geographic boundary that many people within that boundary identify with. Now, next up, we have what type of battery options, if any, are available to store excess electricity? That's a really good question. So to start off, it's important to note that when a typical standard solar system is installed, during a blackout, that solar system will not operate. The solar systems are designed to shut down automatically so they don't send electricity back to the grid when potentially that could harm a utility line worker making repairs. So now the option of battery storage is becoming increasingly available to people across the country to help provide resiliency benefits as well as additional revenue streams such as demand management. And it's really up to the community in order to decide how much they want to emphasize battery storage in their installer selection process. So the Solar Partnership and Sustainable CUNY have a number of resources on this. Sustainable CUNY leads the Smart DG Hub Resilient Solar Project, which is working with many New York City agencies and organizations in order to expand the storage and solar plus storage markets in New York City. You can go to the Solar Map, nysolarmap.com, and click on Solar Plus Storage to access many of these resources. And we're just about complete with a storage for Solarize FAQ sheet, which talks about some of the considerations there. So there are a number of battery options available, but to provide the full context, it is currently the process of permitting these systems in New York City is just being fleshed out and developed. So currently there are some battery storage systems in the city, but not too many. The market is just starting to grow. Now, the next question we have is, I am a homeowner. What choice is better for me, putting solar panels on my roof or community solar? That's another really good question, and it depends a little bit on who the homeowner is and what their goals are. From a strictly financial standpoint, 9 times out of 10, putting panels on your own roof is going to provide more savings over the long term than subscribing to community solar. But in some cases, on roofs that are particularly small or constrained, it might be very expensive to put a solar installation up on the roof, and that could extend that payback time out. In that case, it might make sense to consider the community solar option, especially if a resident is part of a co-op or a condo where the process can be longer to put solar up on the roof. Community shared solar is an option that can make solar a reality much more quickly. But from a purely financial standpoint, if the system is being purchased or financed through a loan, the savings are typically going to be better for putting solar panels on your own roof. The community solar option is more akin to a lease with a rooftop system. So we don't have any other questions in currently. If you have any other questions, we will be happy to answer them if you type them into the chat box, either chat towards Sustainable CUNY or to the full group. All right, we've just received in another question asking New York City or full New York State. So the Solarize New York City program is only for New York City, for the 5 boroughs. It is funded by the city to help expand solar within the 5 boroughs. Beyond the 5 boroughs, there is a program run by NYSERDA called Community Solar NY. That program has been very successful. They've had over 50 campaigns across the state, including some in New York City, and They are in the middle of their second round or just wrapping up their second round, and there's been discussion about a third round next year. So it is possible to take advantage of both these campaigns, to have additional resources, or both these programs, I should say, to have additional resources available to a community group running a campaign. But the Solarize NYC program is specifically available in New York City. Now we have another question that came in about community shared solar. This is another good one. Does the same incentive or incentives apply for community solar and solar panels on the roof? And that's a really good question, and the answer is a little bit tricky, but generally speaking, not all of the same incentives apply to community solar as solar panels on your roof. So for example, the New York City has a tax abatement that's available, but that is only available to the property owner who hosts the solar installation. So if a business or a multifamily building hosted a community shared solar array, that business or multifamily building would be able to receive that property tax abatement. But the homeowners or renters or others who subscribe to it would not get that incentive. Whereas anyone who installed solar panels directly on their roof would be eligible. Now, for the other tax credits and incentives, the federal tax credit is a little bit of a gray area. The IRS hasn't issued definitive guidance on this yet, although there was one case that is not broadly applicable that indicated that the investment tax credit from the federal government would be applicable to shared solar, but that has not been expanded into guidance that can be taken by anyone yet. As always, we recommend that anyone making these decisions check with their tax professional to make sure that their eligibility for the incentive. And then lastly, there is a New York State tax credit that is currently only available for installations on primary residence in New York State. So again, that community shared solar installations may not be eligible for that. But just because those incentives are not available does not mean that community shared solar is necessarily a bad value proposition. Community shared solar subscriptions could still save a renter or homeowner money immediately by offering a lower rate for the solar energy than for their normal Con Ed bill. Now, the next question is, how can tax-exempt nonprofits take advantage of tax incentives for solar projects? And so that's another tricky question that nonprofits often face in the market. And so one option is the third-party ownership that I mentioned earlier, where if the system is owned and operated by a financing company or the solar installer, then that allows them to take the tax credits and incorporate those into the lease rate or the PPA that nonprofit would be able to receive. So the value is not going directly to the nonprofit, but it's incorporated into the rate that they're receiving for the solar energy. Another option that can be available is what's called a flip model. This is more common in community shared solar installations, where the ownership of the panels would flip to the nonprofit after all of the tax incentives are collected by third-party investors. And so that allows the nonprofit to ultimately take ownership of the system, but avoid the complexity of utilizing the tax credits by passing that off to third-party investors who have the tax appetite to take them. So we still have a few minutes left on the webinar. If anyone else has any further questions, we don't have any others in the queue at the moment. Please type in any questions you have into the chat box, and we'll be happy to answer them. As I mentioned earlier, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll make it available on the website afterwards, as well as a record of the questions that have been asked. And if you do have any further questions that occur to you afterwards, as I mentioned, the nysolar@cuny.edu available at the bottom of this slide. Now, here's another question that just came in. If I go solar as an apartment renter and years later I buy a house, do I still get the incentives? That's another really good question, a little bit tricky. So the answer depends on if you go solar as a renter and you have a shared solar account with a company that runs a shared solar installation and project, you are allowed to keep that if you move properties within the same load area for the utility. But if you give that up, you could install a solar system on a house later and receive the incentives. There's also a way that if you installed it on multiple meters, that could work. But basically, the bigger picture is that if you had a community shared solar subscription and later moved into a house, that installation on the house would be eligible for incentives. However, those incentives might change years down the line. So the federal tax credit is currently locked in past 2020. The New York City property tax abatement is scheduled to expire at the end of this year, although there's a bill that passed the state legislature that would extend it for an additional 2 years. The state tax credit has no expiration date, so that is not a worry. But the one incentive that may be lower, and probably would be lower in this example, is the incentive available from NYSERDA through the New York Sun program. That incentive is actually paid to the contractor who passes the saving on to the homeowner, and the incentive level is scheduled to decline as more solar is deployed throughout the state. So basically, as the market matures and doesn't need as much of an incentive, that incentive goes down. And so in this example, there may not be quite as many incentives available, but it would be possible to use those incentives later. So we have 4 more minutes if anyone else has any further questions that they would like answered. Please use the chat box to submit your questions. We just received one other question that I think is an important one. If you can't get your community together to apply for the September 13th deadline, will there be future opportunities to apply for the program? And the answer is yes, there will be future opportunities. As I mentioned, the New York City Solar Partnership will be running up to 8 campaigns per year through 2025. And so this deadline of September 13th is just for round 1. We're going to be running the next round. We don't have a date set as of yet, but it will be early in 2017. So if your community group or your community organization is not quite ready to apply for this round, we encourage you to stay in touch. We'll be adding everybody to a membership list to receive future updates, but keep in mind that there will be future rounds of the Solarize NYC program. Here's another question that just came in. What kind of confirmation from community members is required for the September 13th deadline? So you certainly don't need confirmation from every member of a community or anything like that. what we're looking for in the criteria that I outlined earlier for applications is a measure of interest and a description of the community itself. So if you are able to do a short survey, say to membership groups, this could be done, say, through a online survey distributed through a community board or a block association, a neighborhood association, just gauging the level of interest in solar in the community. Additionally, you could look at how much solar has already been installed in your community. There's a resource for this at data.ny.gov, as well as the New York City, or the New York Solar Map has a map of installations at nysolarmap.com that can all provide information on local pricing, installations that have already been done, and you can get a sense of how much solar has already been installed in your local community. So what we're looking for in this application is really a definition of the boundaries of the community or the membership and why people identify with that community as a whole. You don't necessarily need to provide individual confirmations from people, but that can be done as well. And then some type of survey or evidence that shows that there is interest within the community and interest within the organization in running the campaign by setting goals and a plan laid out for the campaign. So we're just about at 2 o'clock now. Any last questions before we wrap up? All right, it doesn't look like we have any other questions, but of course, if anything occurs to you later, please do email us at nysolar@cuny.edu. I'll say that one more time just because there was a siren in the background, but it's nysolar@cuny.edu. And you can find everything you need to apply at solarizenyc.com. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate the great turnout and the interest in solar in New York City. And we encourage you all to apply to Solarize NYC to help make New York City a cleaner and greener community for all of us. Thank you.